The mile 99 rest stop sat under a pale desert sky, with trucks, a diner, and a small motel circling a sun-cracked square. Penapole and Gerald managed the nap nook and a tiny library tucked between soda machines and the shade of a mesquite. They kept the place quiet so travelers could sleep and read without trouble. It worked because they cared about calm and order. Penapole said, "Rest keeps travelers kind." Gerald said, "Tidy books keep stories calm." Penapole drifted through mornings, her anklet frayed from naps and her fish-print sarong ready for any use. Gerald arrived at dawn, feathers brushed like the sunrise, with a whistle tuned to a clear note and a clipboard tabbed for everything. They were different but worked as a pair, because the rest stop needed both ease and structure. Each morning began with a check of hammocks and shelves. Penapole said, 5 more minutes would fix everything. Gerald said, "A checklist will fix it faster." They disagreed about the library at night. Penapole believed the paper breathed and traded secrets after the truck convoys passed. Gerald insisted the sounds were the vents rattling, and if anything deserved attention, it was the county cheese law about springs during drought. Both watched over quiet so sleepers stayed safe. Penapole said, "The books whisper after midnight." Gerald said, "That's the AC and the cheese statute is what matters." New improvement commissioners arrived with forms and flair. An eggplant purple squid with a halo of punctuation bubbles, and a flamboyant kelp. Bowtie set a briefcase on the motel desk. Beside him, a silent eggplant purple squid with velvet dark tentacles and inkless tips placed a second briefcase, her ring marked with a Jepson sigil. They behaved as if the desk was already theirs. "Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle said, we'll improve this place." Countess Slopula said nothing. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle told the diner crowd that sleepy, nosy travelers read things like the Jepson files. He said the files had confusing items about certain commissioners, and night hours should become athletic hours to distract everyone. Countess Slopula tapped her ring on the counter with a steady rhythm that felt like a stamp. Their goal was not service but diversion. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle said, "Athletic nights will end nosy reading." Countess Slopula stayed silent and tapped once. Their bounce initiative binder showed a polymer pump hidden under the square. It fed in Kai gel into the motel, nap nook, and any bed-like surface until mattresses bounced like trampolines. The plan replaced rest with non-stop motion so no one would read or whisper. The halo of bubbles advertised it as a festival. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle said, "Vibrancy will fix everything." Countess Slopula kept her pen-like tip still. Gerald confronted them at the nap nook counter about keeping heads level and honoring the cheese law during drought. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle sprayed punctuation bubbles and called their interpretation flexible. Countess Slopula slid over a stamped form certifying the bounce initiative as enrichment. Uncle Rollo, a desert tortoise in a sequined blazer, shouted into a handheld speaker about wrestling lights if commissioners could interpret rules. Gerald said, "Springs are illegal in drought." Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle said, "Our interpretation is fresh." By afternoon a bird plicaris, Jimad smell crawled across the square. Fred and Ava, teal eels from the fountain basin, surfaced and sniffed the current with quick flicks. Ava said she and Fred checked drains weekly, but this odor was wrong and corporate. Penapole promised to help after calming a jittery tourist, while Gerald logged a smell audit as urgent but complicated. Ava said, "This leak smells corporate." Penapole said, "I'll help as soon as I settle them." Within a day the squids controlled the rest stop. Beds launched sleepy travelers into lamps and even into cactus near open doors, and complaints replaced laughter. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle chirped that vibrancy was up 80%, while Countess Slopula glided through rooms stamping approvals. The nap nook closed for conversion, denying quiet sleep. Mr. Wiggle-Wuggle said, "See the vibrancy metrics." Countess Slopula offered another silent stamp. Gerald tried to shut the polymer valves with his whistle and clipboard in hand. Penapole wrapped her sarong around a loud intake pipe to muffle it. Mr. Wiggle Wuggle flashed a jangling bracelet stamp JF and overrode every control, and Countess Slopula tapped her ring once to lock the panel. Uncle Rollo argued on a static radio about repainting the crosswalk for a wrestling event. Planing tradition. Gerald said, I'm filing an emergency injunction. No more boing. Mr. Wiggle Wuggle said, overridden. The library fell into chaos when bounce spread. A toddler ricocheted into a paperback pile. Truckers nodded off on soda crates only to bounce awake, and Penapol's anklet snagged a tilting shelf. Gerald snapped that her sarong move made it worse, as she whispered that his forms had stopped nothing. The squids rolled by, pleased, as the rest stop sagged into insomnia. Gerald said, that stunt made it worse. Penapol said, your forms didn't stop the boing either. The smell piqued and stung eyes. Fred and Ava surfaced coughing while Penapol sat beside them, finally alert, and Gerald lowered his clipboard like a shield. Across the plaza, a human Italian pizza chef tossed dough outside his window with practiced rhythm and disappeared back inside. Uncle Rollo, ignored by most, complained that the league's tag champions were frozen out by a shady committee. Penapol said, breathe steady, we'll fix the source. Uncle Rollo said, this politics stinks worse than the square. Under the reek and noise, the pelicans reached their lowest point. Gerald said the problem had grown too big and that books did not whisper solutions. Penapol insisted the books had muttered about drains, eels, and a cheating comma bracelet. He wanted a plan with steps. She wanted a quiet bench. Gerald said, I need steps that hold. Penapol said, I heard drains, eels, and a cheating comma bracelet. After a stretch of squeaking silence, Penapol stood and helped the eels investigate. She tied her sun-faded sarong over their gills as a filter and felt along the fountain tiles until she found a warm seam, where cold water should have been. Ava guided her beak to a disguised humming grate, and Fred winked as if to confirm the find. Kindness started to work again because the clue was real. Penapol said, found a warm seam where it should be cold. Ava said, the grate is hidden right here. They called Gerald, and he returned without complaint. He sketched the layout while Fred and Ava demonstrated how their electroreception could feel and short a powerful pump if they reached it. The smell eased when they capped 2 feeder lines, proving their method. Across the curb, the squids approached a striped crosswalk and, oddly, began to tiptoe like they feared the lines. Gerald said, that is strange. Penapol said, that is a weakness. They reasoned through the problem together. Crosswalks would slow the squids near every key panel, and the eels could short pumps during the delay. Rollo's distant commentary marked time like a drum as they asked Fred and Ava to join. The eels agreed because they had been heard, given a blanket, and treated as neighbors with useful skills. Penapol said, crosswalks by time. Gerald said, eels, can you short the pumps? Fred said, we can if we can reach the conduits. Quick interlude for the audience. If this crosswalk labyrinth has you hooked, tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment with the word slop. It helps this little rest stop keep the lights steady and the beds calm. Thanks for riding along through the boing to the fix. They reconciled, feathers brushing in a steady truce. Gerald apologized for dismissing whispers, and Penapol apologized for surprise improvising. They agreed to use instinct and clipboard together. They built a team. Eels for currents and sparks, Uncle Rollo for announcements and crowd control, and diner staff as volunteer crossing guards with chalk. They owned the duty because it was their rest stop. Gerald said, I was wrong to dismiss the whispers. Penapol said, I should warn you before I improvise. Uncle Rollo said, I'll bring the crowd and the noise control. They moved fast. Rollo announced a ceremonial entrance parade that required bold, fresh zebra stripes and 3 temporary crosswalks. The diner crew chalked a winding labyrinth around the pump house and admin door, connecting every must-reach point. Fred and Ava slid into drains and waited with eyes gleaming teal. Rollo said, behold the grand entrance stripes. Gerald said, make every line count. Mr. Wiggle Woggle arrived swinging his JF charms and calling for maximum bounce. Countess Lopula glided with her signet catching light. Penapole waved casually from across the square and asked for a Jepson rumor board statement. And Gerald blew a whistle code to prepare to dance. The squids lunged for the admin door, froze at the crosswalk lattice, and began awkward tiptoes. Penapole said, "The rumor board wants your statement." Gerald's whistle cut clean through the air. Fred and Ava pulsed through drains and shorted a relay with a clean flick. Wiggle Woggles, punctuation bubbles clumped into nervous ellipses as he tried to hurry, and Countess Lopula hesitated at each stripe before stepping. Penapole strung hammock twine low between bollards, and Gerald whistled a second code that sent diner staff rolling book carts into place. The weakness became a net. Wiggle Woggle said, "We must hurry, careful steps." Gerald said, "Code 2 block the lanes." The squid squirmed from friction, not regret. Wiggle Woggle tried to vault and snagged the twine, tumbling into the book carts with a thud and a skittering bow tie. Countess Lopula moved to flank, but the crosswalk lattice forced tiny tiptoes. Fred and Ava arced into the primary conduit and silenced the main pump with a fizzy pop, while Rollo boomed play-by-play. Rollo said, "Down he goes into the encyclopedias." Penapole said, "Hold the lines." Penapole vaulted and used her sarong like a net to pin the Countess's silent tentacles against the lines. Gerald stood tall with a steady whistle and a small security escort of diner's staff and crossing guards. Wiggle Woggle sputtered exclamation point bubbles, but his bracelet meant nothing with the pumps off. The labyrinth and the eels left no space to escape. Penapole said, "Stay still." Gerald said, "Hold position." They marched the squids to the museum case that held the county's cheddar slab. The carved law was clear: no sprung beds in drought, no stealing sleep for spectacle. The highway marshal, who had waited for a lawful trigger, nodded, cited the cheese statute, and removed the commissioner's authority. The squids were escorted to a fishbowl caddy for a courtroom with no crosswalk loopholes. The marshal said, "By the cheese statute, you're done." "Mr." Wiggle Woggle sputtered punctuation that meant nothing. As soon as the pumps died, the damage began to undo itself. Fred and Ava reversed polymer flow by tickling backwash valves, and the gel withdrew. Mattresses settled, slats relaxed, and complaints softened into yawns. The smell lifted when the leak was capped, and the square felt normal again. Fred said, "Backflow engaged." Gerald said, "Let it all drain and rest." Inside the library, hands lifted toppled shelves. Penapole brushed dust from paperbacks and said the books were whispering thank you. And Gerald, cheeks pink, admitted he heard the soft rustle of indexes, sounding relieved. The Wrestling League sponsored the Great Nap Invitational and replaced the 3 worst-hit mattresses with firm, unsprung ones. For once, politics helped rest. Penapole said, "They're whispering thank you." Gerald said, "I hear indexes settling down." They sat on the fountain lip with the eels coiled like commas. Penapole thanked Fred and Ava for joining, because they were heard and given a blanket. Ava promised to keep the drains honest and showed a tiny controlled zap that tickled Penapole's anklet. Gerald wrote their skills on his clipboard and underlined them. Penapole said, "Thank you for staying with us." Ava said, "We'll keep the currents honest." Back at the nap nook, travelers checked into quiet rooms. Gerald posted a copy of the cheese law next to a photo of a contented jackrabbit. Penapole hung her fish print sarong as a curtain in the quietest corner and started to borrow a blanket bin. The rest stop's reputation shifted to soft landings and fair rules. Gerald said, "Let's make the law plain." Penapole said, "Blankets and calm for everyone." The villains faced full consequences. The highway marshal published the cheese law citation and filed Jepson documents proving the squids tried to erase their own scandal. Their positions were revoked, their accessories were placed in evidence, and a permanent ban barred them from sleep-related establishments. No one forgave them because they had come to steal rest. The marshal said, "Your authority is revoked and recorded." Mr. Wiggle Woggle's bubbles faded to nothing. Wrestling League politics cooled when Uncle Rollo brokered a compromise. The mid-card got a matinee headline. The tag champions received a named crosswalk, and any repaint for showmanship now had to improve safety. Rollo accepted the honorary title of crosswalk commissioner and announced it every sunset for a week. His vanity ended up helping the public and had helped the plan. Rollo said, crosswalk commissioner reporting at dusk. The pelicans returned to their old disagreement with new gentleness. Penapole said the books had whispered about trains and perhaps about the cheese law, and Gerald admitted he heard something last night like a bibliography giggle. They agreed that listening had saved them, whether the book spoke or not. She passed a cracker to the eels. Penapole said, we keep listening. Gerald said, I heard a giggle in the indexes. At dusk the desert glowed while the crosswalks faded to soft lavender. The eels slipped back into the fountain and promised to patrol the current. Travelers settled onto beds that acted like beds. The Nap Nook's thank you wall grew, including one note carved into a cheese rind that Penapole insisted smelled like justice, which made Gerald laugh. Penapole said, that rind smells like justice. Gerald said, let it stay. They set a final policy. Trampolines were banned from bedrooms, but an outdoor bounce pad behind the diner would host afternoon fun where knees could be young and mistakes could be funny. Uncle Rollo promised to regulate it with more fairness than drama, and everyone pretended to believe him. Under the stars, sleep came without a fight. Gerald said, bedrooms, no springs. Penapole said, bounce outside after lunch. Rollo said, I'll keep it fair mostly. All the slop in this video was generated using AI. This notice exists to inform viewers plainly. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment the word slop so more people find this story. Thanks for supporting calm beds and fair laws at mile 99.